Hello, Renan. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Henan. Hi, Kayo.
Hello, Kayo and Mike.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, are you an iOS developer?
Yes, I am an iOS developer.
For how long?
Professionally, it's going to complete 3 years at the end of this year.
Fantastic. How can we help you?
So I have this project I've been working in the past 2 years, and it's huge. It has lots of legacy code and also the structure of it. So I need some help with some problems I listed.
Right, dealing with huge legacy projects. Okay. So, what is the first problem?
Okay, so I think we can start by the question, how could I solve the problem of the SDK initialization? So I have a short description here. So the first time the app opens, it tries to initialize the SDKs before getting the configurations of the client from the server. And because of that, only from the second time the user opens the app, the SDKs will be initialized with the previous configurations that were saved locally. So I think it's a huge problem because the SDKs won't be used the first time the user opens the application, and it should, I think.
But it wouldn't crash.
Yes.
Okay, so the app would still work, but some SDKs would be unavailable.
Yes.
For example, one example of an SDK.
Analytics.
Analytics. Okay. All right. So this happens. You load the SDKs when you start the application in the app delegate.
Yes, there is a specific instance for it. One instance for each SDK I need to initialize.
All right, and you need a key, for example, to initialize the SDK. If you don't have this key, you cannot do it. But you cannot do it. You only get this key after you perform some network request.
Yes, and once I get it by the first time, I save it locally, and the next time it is gotten again, it replaces the current instance saved locally, so it will always be updated.
All right, and why can't you provide the SDK key, for example?
I think it's for a security reason to have it on the server side.
Okay, but if you download it and then you store it, you would be in the device, right? It can also be reverse engineered somehow.
Yes.
Or is it stored somewhere like in the keychain?
Not actually, it is in the user defaults. I think I could change it, but this is the manner it is implemented today. So, yeah.
Yeah, if it's in user defaults, you can very easily fetch it from your iPhone. It's just plain text, right? It's a plist, like an XML. You can just extract all the values there in the user defaults very easily. So if you want to hide this from clients, you probably need a better strategy. So that's another point. But let's say you need to fetch this from the network. Usually you need this because maybe you have a variable SDK key that it may change over time, so you need to load it. One strategy is to provide a hard-coded one bundled in the app. Right, so until you load it, you use this hard-coded one, and after you load, you override it. The next time you load the app, you have the new one. Another way is to defer the initialization of the SDKs until you fetch the config. Like you don't need to load the SDKs as soon as you load the application, right? You could wait to load it, the configuration, and then load the SDKs. And hook a callback. For example, you have a service that loads the config. You could emit some events, some callbacks, and once you get the request complete successfully, you load the SDKs.
Okay, I see.
Or you can let the user wait. You show a spinner until you load the. the request. But
that's
ideally you don't want to do that, right? Only if really, really needed. Like the app can only work if I have this SDK loaded. Then you need to make the user hang. But 99% of the time you don't need that. You just change the design a little bit. So the app is responsive as soon as you open it, but those supporting SDKs will be loaded at runtime at some point in the future. And if there are important events that you cannot miss, what you can do is you can hold them in memory until you load the SDK. And then once the SDK is loaded, you flush all the requests, you send them all to the network at the same time as well.
Okay.
So you can save them locally. And once you load the SDK, you sync.
One of the things about delaying the initialization of the SDKs is that at least one of them needs the informations of the application did finish launching function. Like it needs the launch options in one of its calls. Would it be the case of saving the launch options until the request is finished too?
Yeah, if it's required.
Okay.
But does it need the whole array, or is there a specific value that you can just get from the dictionary?
The whole array, I just pass it for the SDK.
Yeah, I said array, but it's a dictionary. Sorry.
Yeah, true. It's a
dictionary. The dictionary. Yeah. Yeah, you can save it as well.
Okay.
You pack it in a request. As I said, like you can keep even tracking events locally until you fetch the request. And when you sync everything,
I see.
And then you don't miss any data.
Okay.
Makes sense. But yeah, I would recommend you to do it like this, like defer the initialization of the SDKs. Because otherwise, if it only loads on the second time you load the app, maybe you're going to lose important information, right?
Yes.
And you said that this is an e-commerce app, and like this data may be very valuable, right? What is the behavior of first-time users? It's very important to know. To know if the app, like you need to change the user interface a little bit, and so it's important data.
Totally.
That you don't want to lose. Another thing you can do is also you track everything locally, what the user is doing. If the SDK is not initialized, you store it somewhere. And when the user open the second time, you already have the config, and then you just sync what was stored.
I think it's a harder one, maybe.
Yeah, but it's another solution as well. So it depends on the needs, right? What is the requirement, and also challenge the requirements sometimes, right? Maybe the requirement's like, no, it needs to be loaded when the application is like, well, why? Maybe by asking why to your product owners, to the stakeholders, you're going to realize that maybe there is another solution to this problem. And
okay.
It's all based on the requirements.
I think another important topic about this that also influences the way it works is that it is a product. So it also has a Android application. So the same configurations need to go to the Android app. I think this is one of the reasons too.
Okay. So ideally you want to replicate the same logic in Android. So you have consistent data. Otherwise you think the behavior is different on Android and iOS just because the collection of data is different as well, right? So ideally they should be in sync. All right, so homework, defer the initialization of the SDKs until you get it, the keys.
All right.
Make sense?
Yes, it does.
Any other problems you're facing?
Yes, there are a couple more. The second one would be about the HTTP requests. So could it be implemented in a better way? So today it uses a default class with default behaviors shared by specific classes that perform the specific requests. And it can be found in the service module, I think.
Here, yes.
Yes. So I have this HTTP base class, which has two main functions to perform the requests, they are kind of generic and can be used to build the different URLs with different paths and parameters. And the specific HTTP clients are in the HTTP specifics, and they inherit from this class. But they do not override these functions, they just use it.
Right.
Okay, so this is like a base class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every specific endpoint will have its own subclass.
Yes, I would say every set of endpoints has its specific class.
Mm-hmm. So you group some endpoints, like everything is configuration like goes into a configuration API subclass. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you add more methods to it.
And these are the public ones as well, right? So
yes.
It's the subclass that has all the public behavior. Okay.
This is the ones I am going to call from all the other places of the project.
Okay. And you don't override any of the methods, only the initializer.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the goal here is to reuse those execute methods, for example, right? From the base class.
Yes.
The idea of inheritance here is for reuse, reusing code. In my experience, inheritance is not a great way for reusing code. Inheritance is to define hierarchies, right? So composition is a better way to reuse code because it's more flexible. It's a more flexible solution. For example, right now, the configuration API is inheriting from HTTP base. And inheritance is an is-a relationship, right? It's inheritance. So you're saying that configuration API is an HTTP base. If you're using composition, you wouldn't inherit from base, but you would say pivot, let, and now the configuration API is not an HTTP base, but it has a client, and that's composition. You can still reuse. Now instead of calling on super, right, calling the super method, you just use the client one. You're still reusing all that HTTP client logic of performing requests and so on, but not with inheritance, but with composition. And this even enables testability now because you can do something like you can inject here the client. And when you're testing, you can provide a subclass like a stub. Right? And then you can stub the requests when you're testing this method here. Because this method will perform some mapping logic and so on, right? With the result. And it's much easier to test this class now.
Yes.
You can provide different implementations of the dependency, but if you inherit from it, there's no way to override that, right? Anymore.
It's fixed.
It's fixed.
Okay.
You can also think about it like this configuration API. I guess this is more of a service sort of component, right? While the HTTP base is more of a infrastructure. Like it knows about URL params and like this lower level type of components, right? So ideally the service is like a higher level type of component.
Okay.
What I mean here basically is like the inheritance is gonna it's gonna mix up things. It's not very good because it's gonna create tight coupling between those two layers, right? So composition is a much better approach.
Okay.
So composition instead of inheritance. In this case, it will yield better results. It will be more testable as well. And you can still reuse the code, but you can provide different implementations now. You're not coupled with that specific superclass behavior.
I see.
Yeah. Just one thing I noticed in the HTTP base class, if you can go Kaio for a second. Like another thing that you can do here to simplify your design, on line 15, you're using the API URL through an info class.
Yes.
Which this is a component in the models module, right? So here you're importing the models. So this is a modular dependency, right, for the HTTP base to the models, just to request the API URL, which this can easily be, you can use dependency injection here, for example, and just pass the URL that you want instead of implicitly reference the info component. Right, and then boom, you don't have any dependencies in any other modules. And this is the way it should be, because again, the HTTP base is an infrastructure type of component, which means it's low level, right? Models now, on the other hand, is like it's higher level.
Okay.
You can use the same base here, but with different base URLs, right? API URLs, just by injecting a different value. Because let's say you want to use the same base, but you want to provide a different URL to it. How are we going to do it if it's global like this, accessing the URL directly? You need to add some kind of flags here. If environment dot something, use this one, else use the other one. Right? And then you need to add this logic inside the component rather than just injecting a different URL. You don't need this. But look, we make this change here, but if this class was inheriting from it, we would have to also update here to also get a URL, right?
Yes.
Be able to pass the super initializer. But by using composition rather, we are able to make this change without breaking existing code.
I see.
Because this is also a dependency. The configuration API doesn't need to create its own dependency. It receives it.
Yeah.
Hey, I can only be instantiated with an HTTP client. The client can only be created with a URL. If you want, and you can have a default URL here. But usually you don't want that, because this is just a generic way of making requests, right? HTTP requests. It shouldn't depend on models. It shouldn't depend on any specific URL. It can work for any URL. It has nothing specific about that URL, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Or that should be the idea, that it can work for any URL.
So you can make changes to this base now without affecting the API. You can change the initializer. You can have subtypes of the HTTP client base without affecting the API.
Okay.
And that's the benefit of composition here.
Yeah.
Plus the benefit of decoupling from specific hard-coded values, because otherwise you need to add globals and maybe compiler flags like if client A use a URL, otherwise use another URL. And then you define all the composition in the composition root.
Okay. Maybe about this same topic, this info class from the models, it is easy to get values from the plist. What do you think about it? Is that a common practice, a good one? I don't know.
Okay, so you have some configuration bundled in the app. At compile time, you bundle there a plist in the bundle, and then you get the values.
Yes.
At runtime. Right, so you have an info plist somewhere. Plist. And you can set some values here.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. When you have like keys they need to load that are client specific and you load the runtime, there's nothing wrong with that. I just recommend that you access those bundled keys and values from the composition root and inject it into your components. So your components don't need to know how this is decided which API URL to use. Because maybe during tests you don't want to use a different URL. But if you are fetching it directly from the bundle, when you're testing, you need to inject it into the bundle so your class can get the URL you want.
I see.
It's much better to, define your components decoupled from environment, decoupled from bundle, from file system, as much as you can. So they're much easier to test, be in a separate module in isolation, be used in different applications, maybe loading from the bundle, maybe loading the URL from a service, from a config service or hard-coded, right? And then your components are decoupled from the environment.
Okay.
Because the environment varies, it changes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the way to do that is by using dependency injection.
Okay.
Yeah, but this
so there's nothing wrong with bundle, but you access these environment details usually from the composition root, and you inject the values into the components.
Okay. Nice.
So which lecture are you in the program?
I'm finishing the module about the service, like the...
Networking.
Yeah, networking, yes.
Yeah, it's all there in the program as well.
You'll see all
what we're
these
saying
things.
Here. Maybe it doesn't make sense right now, like composition root, but it's all there in the program. You get there eventually.
By composition root, you say like the object or the module responsible for building stuff and putting it together?
Yes, it's the main module, right? The entry point of your application that composes the object graph.
Okay.
And it's the most concrete module in your application. It's usually the application module. You have a main module here, right? Yeah, where you have the app delegate, like the entry point of your application. There you instantiate the classes, you bundle things together, you inject the environment, you deal with bundles and all that things.
Okay.
That's the composition root. Instantiate and compose the components. It makes sense, more sense with examples there in the program.
Okay.
Right, did we answer this question?
Yes, totally. Thank you very much.
So composition over inheritance when you're trying to reuse code. Use inheritance for hierarchies.
Okay. So the next one is about the modularization of the project. Do you think it could be done in a different way or in a better way? Because today it is divided by the type of file, not for the features, by the features.
Okay, can you explain quickly the structure here?
So the main one. It has like the initialization logic of the project. It also is the place where I point for different clients, because this is a white label project, so I need to change the configuration in the main project. The models has all the classes, like the client, product, the cart, and things like that, and also some enums. The analytics has the implementations of different analytics the project has. It basically has a central point that delivers the messages received for the specific implementations. The UI has all the screens of the application, and each screen has its implementation, like the entire implementation, the logic and everything, the interaction with the user, the requests and everything else. The service is to make the HTTP requests to communicate with the backend, and the checkout is a module that contains the cart view and all the views of the checkout process. And I created it because I think about creating an app clips in the future, and I need only a specific part of the whole app for the app clips.
Nice.
Awesome.
So thinking about the structure here, we are separating. It's a workspace, right, with a bunch of projects. And you have a project, a main, models. So you're grouping by type of components, right? All the models are in the models.
One thing that makes me concerned, especially, is, for example, that almost all the other modules use the models module. And it's the same with analytics. I don't know if it's helpful for the project.
Okay. So there are many dependencies in the models here. So every time you change here, you need to recompile a bunch of other components as well. Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? There's no perfect project structure that works for everyone. No, there's nothing wrong having all types in a single module, if that makes sense to your project, or having multiple modules or multiple projects, multiple targets, multiple packages. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So everything's valid as long as there's a good reason for it. So what are you trying to achieve here by separating into projects?
Actually, I just received the project in this structure, and I'm keeping it as it is because it's really huge and it would give me a huge work to change it all. The checkout module was already a huge work, like I had, because it didn't exist before. I created it recently.
Okay, so it doesn't mean the structure is bad, right? Are you having issues with the structure?
Not actually. I don't think so.
Yeah, if you're having issues with the structure, then we can think about solutions. But if it's working well for the project, it's okay, right? Because could we split it differently? Yes, we could split by feature. For example, every feature would have its own project, like you did here with checkout. But you did for the checkout for a specific reason, because you want to have the checkout as an app clip completely isolated from everything else, right? So you can have a very tiny, small app clip for the checkout functionality only. Then you can separate it in a separate target, in a separate project. So when there's a good reason, then we think like, if we have a problem, we find a solution, right? So usually you divide by feature when the company structure is divided by feature. For example, if you have feature teams working independently, team A takes care of feature A, team B takes care of feature B, and they are working independently in those features. So thus you have separate projects for each feature, and you work, without getting each other's way. Then you compose them in a main application module.
I see.
So it depends. Usually the structure and the architecture of your application follows the organization and structure of the company you work on. There is a strong correlation between them.
Okay. I think another concern I have about this structure is if it is going to affect the unit tests or not exactly.
Let's see. One good thing of separating this, for example, the models, is a framework which is independent from all the others, right? It's not about another module.
Yes.
A good thing is that when you're testing the models, you're only running tests for that model. It's going to build very quickly because models are simple types. It doesn't have dependencies and environments. They should be like pure types, right? It's very easy to test it in isolation. So I don't see a problem. For example, you can test the models here. Models test. Create a test target here. New test bundle. Boom. You're not going to have problems. But when you're testing another module, maybe when you're testing the service, you have to instantiate some models because the service depends on the models, right?
Yes.
Again, it's not a problem.
Do you have a specific example, Henan, in mind?
Not actually, and this concern I have is just because the project doesn't have tests today, and I plan to implement it. So I'm just trying to figure things, I think.
So the idea is to keep it simple based on the needs of the project. So you will define the structure of the project based on the team structure, the build times. Maybe you have this massive legacy project, everything is in one module, and it takes 25 minutes to build. That's not great, right?
Yeah.
And then we split into separate modules, and then you can develop and test things much faster because you're not building the whole project all the time. You build the whole project once after you're done with the feature and you're composing it in your main application target, right? So But then this was driven by a need, like the build times were too high, you know. It would depend on the testing strategy you have as well. If you want to test things in isolation, the automation scripts, like how is your CI and CD pipelines? Do you have any automation, or everything is manually at the time?
Yes, we have an automation to generate builds for test flight.
Nice.
Awesome.
It may also be dictated by the number of clients you have. Maybe some clients, even though it's a white label app here, maybe some clients say, you know what, we want a very custom UI. Does you need to create another project for a specific client, which has everything, we use everything but the UI. It may happen, you know, and then you will create a different structure for that specific client. It's a premium client that's paying more and wants more different things. Then it can happen as well. So you need to accommodate those business needs that may arrive in the future. And when they come and ask you that, you just say, okay, I'm just going to create a new project. I'm not going to try to fit it, add more flags here, you know. But I don't see any problem. I don't think this is going to prevent you from testing at all. So you say you have no tests at all in this project?
Yes, no tests at all.
And how do you guarantee that the app works before releasing?
We test it manually.
Okay.
Which is a really big problem, I think.
Yeah.
I'm trying to solve it.
It takes time and it's error prone. All right. So I like to keep it simple. When I start projects, I usually have one project and I have two targets. One target for things that are independent of platform. So I can run and test drive it without the simulator, for example, which speeds up the test. And I have another platform specific target for iOS, for example, if it's an iOS application.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I go with that as much as I can because it's very simple to maintain. Two modules, one for platform agnostic things, one for platform specific things. Now, if I start having problems with build times, then I start separating things. If I want to reuse something in a different project, maybe I'm going to create a package for it, you know, but there's no perfect solution that will work all the time. Yeah. It will really depend on the needs of the project.
Gradually as well. Yeah. Start simple, gradually.
Yeah. So I recommend you try to find out why did they split the project like this, because there's probably a good reason for it. Maybe try to find some documentation.
Yes, actually, I know that the project before was a huge single project and there was the problem of building, so they split it. Another thing that I could change was the use of multiple targets. Like before we had one target for each client. And after like 25 clients, it started to be a problem with the XC project file, I think. It just broke completely and the project even didn't want to open. So I needed to minimize the number of targets and use the XC config files. So I think I understand the point of changing gradually according to the needs. Okay.
Keep as simple as possible, because there's always a cost. Every time you complicate a little bit the setup, there's going to be a cost of maintenance, right?
Okay. I think that's it about it. Thank you. Can we go to the next?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you think about the cells of the table view in the home performing HTTP requests? Could it be improved in some way? So in the UI module, yes, there is a home, which is a table view, and the cell is a collection view with some products, and the cell performs the request.
API requests.
Yes, to get the products from the server.
Okay, like here. It instantiates and loads the details from the search API. Okay, here. All right. So you have a cell, and inside the cell you have another collection view.
Yes. It's a table view cell with a collection inside of it.
And you load the data for that embedded collection view from within the cell?
Yes.
Directly. Okay. So is there a problem with that? Well, ideally, the view shouldn't perform requests directly. That's the recommendation. Why? Because the views now are coupled with the provenance of the data, where the data is coming from an API. What if you want to load the data sometimes from another API? How are we going to do it? I'm going to add some logic here, a Boolean,
Yeah.
When those requirements arrive, you say, okay, what if you wanted to load it from a local cache in some cases? In some cases, for a specific type of product, we have embedded the data. Now you're going to have to add more logic to the view. But sometimes you need to use API 1, sometimes API 2. If it's a product coming from Amazon, it needs to be this. If it's a project coming from eBay, it's another API. It's like, and then you start adding a lot of logic to the view, and it's going to be very hard to test. And how are we going to test it?
Exactly.
It's going to be very hard to test. You either have to perform the real requests when testing, which will make your test slow and fragile, right? What if the server is unresponsive at the time? What if you don't have internet connection? What if the connection is slow? Or you will have to stub the whole network stack globally, which will make the test slower, more fragile because you're dealing with global state. You also won't be able to run the test in parallel since you're dealing with global state, because if you change global state, you affect multiple tests that are running in parallel. So your test suite is going to be slower. And you have to stub things globally.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. You either going to put a lot of logic in the cell or in the API implementations that you use like directly here, even like sometimes through a singleton,
Yeah.
Common as well. And your tests also will be hard to write and maintain. They'll be slow and more fragile. And those are the downsides of doing this directly in the view, because you're coupling the view with the provenance of the data.
Yeah.
Okay.
It has to do with separation of concerns here, right? Like just, the UI, you just want to render stuff. That's it pretty much. Leave the networking or whatever, other service type of things in other layers. And by the way, you're going to learn, again, all these things, you're going to see them in detail in the program, how to decouple, the UI from services and from strategies. Might be the network, might be local, might be something else.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are recommendations, right? Is there something absolutely wrong? Like, those are very strong recommendations from people who have done this in the past. Like, we've done this in the past, and we got terrible results out of that. And we follow people, they also advise against it, right? So those are guidelines. We're saying it would be best to move this somewhere else. And the data, the views only deal with data and render it. It's very, very simple logic, very easy, simple to test. You take a snapshot out of it. For example, imagine you want to take a snapshot test out of this. How are you going to do it? You actually need to wait until the request completes, and then you take a snapshot of the screen, So it makes everything slower and harder. So we recommend you move this logic somewhere else, and the view only deals with data directly. Just render, hey, view, renders this. The view is like, hey, it's done. It's much, much simpler.
In that case, moving the API requests for the table view itself also wouldn't be a good solution.
Yeah. No. Table view, no. One level above, outside the view. And then you can provide the data from anywhere. When you're testing, you just literally instantiate some products and you pass to the view. And you can also say, sometimes I want to load from the cache. No problem. Without changing the view, you're not loading from the cache, you're loading from a different API. As long as you give it some products, it can render it on the screen. Where the products are coming from doesn't matter. The views shouldn't be coupled with the provenance of the data.
Okay.
That's the recommendation. And it's all there in the program. You'll see how to do it in a very simple, clean way.
Okay. I'm just thinking that maybe I could assume that to solve this problem, like totally for the UI module, I would be able to remove the service dependence from the UI project.
That's it. Every time you type import service, boom, that should be the signal, you know.
Okay.
I just strongly coupled the UI module with the service module. But
nice.
Excellent. That's it. Exactly. You got it.
Okay. It's good to know. It's a concrete guideline, I would say. It's going to help me.
Yeah. Again, and this is like this. There's a principle here involved, right? The dependency inversion principle, and it's like this violates the dependency inversion principle, which it says like lower level components shouldn't depend on higher level components, basically, right? And again, the service is a higher level component. The UI is infrastructure, right? It's like
so which means the UI could depend on the service. It's a choice. But what is the problem? If you couple the UI with the service, then you can only serve the UI with that specific concrete service, right? If you want to decouple it from the provenance of the data, from which service the data is coming from, you invert the dependency. But also without coupling the service with the UI. You can have an adapter in between, if that's the case.
Okay.
So there are different strategies depending on what you're trying to achieve. Always depending on what you're trying to achieve. Keep it simple as much as you can.
Okay.
Because you can say, well, but this is simple, Kyle. This is simple to do in the UI. Well, but it's not simple to test it, is it? And then you have problems. Right? You need to see simplicity not as, oh, this code looks simple when I look at it, but it's like, what is the overall cost in the whole pipeline, development pipeline? It's going to make testing harder. It's going to make automation harder. And there will be a cost down the line. Maybe not directly in the code here, but there will be a cost in development time. It will take longer to develop and ship features to the clients. Time to market is going to be affected.
Yes.
So it's important to see the overall cost of decisions, not just in the code directly, but in the whole development pipeline. Because testing enables automation, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and makes businesses competitive. So it's a good thing.
Yes. Okay, about it, I think that's all. Thank you again for making it very clear. Okay, the next question is, should I start refactoring and implementing unit tests? Because I need it and I will do it. But as you can see, the project is huge and I am a bit lost, I think. I don't know where to start to implement unit tests. I saw that in the course, you start by the network module. So I have the thought that maybe I should start by there too, but I am not sure.
Okay, we started from the network because we started developing the app from the network, right? Yeah. But later we developed another feature starting from the UI, and then we started testing from the UI. We could also start testing from the database. We start from the simplest way, and at the time, we showed that we only knew the API specs, so we start from the API. But if you only know the design, we start from the design. You can start from any direction, your application. And then from this direction you start testing, right? So I would start right now with a legacy project that has 0 tests, and I work with those projects. I'm not I don't run away from legacy code. There's nothing wrong with it. If I inherit a legacy code base, I would start adding tests from the next place I need to change in the code base. For example, if we have a new feature to implement, I will test drive the new feature. If I need to change an existing feature, I would test drive around the places I need to change.
Okay.
And then I will make the change. First, I will write the test. Let's say, I need to change something here in the UI. we need to change the layout of the cells. I would start adding tests for the existing code. And when I have the tests that I trust, then I will make the change that I want with confidence.
Yeah.
Now, if I need to fix a bug in this code base, oh, there's a bug here. I would write a test proving the bug exists and that I understand why it exists, because you can only write a test if you know what the problem is. And then I will make the test pass, proving that I fixed the bug. Right? So you would do it gradually. You start adding the tests as you go. You don't need to stop development. Actually,
Yes.
I recommend you don't stop developing the app to add the tests. Add the tests as you go. Every time you change the code base, you make it a little better. Strive to make the code better when you touch it. Every time, make it better, not worse. If this is something that's not good, improve it a little bit. Doesn't mean you're going to stop and refactor the whole code base for a week. No, I'm talking minutes, not hours. Make it a little bit better, a little bit more decoupled. Like we did with the API. Instead of inheriting from the code base, now it has a HTTP client. Took me 10 seconds, right, to inject it in there. Now, boom, enable more testability, a little bit more, closer to the goal. And little by little, you will clean up the whole legacy code base. It may take 1 month, 3 months, a year, but you're still shipping value. You're still delivering value to your clients. You're still delivering new versions of the app as you go. So you get everyone on board in the business as well. If you tell them, no, I need 3 months just to fix, and after 3 months, you will have the code base exactly as it is. The product will be exactly the same, but you have tests. They're not going to say yes. No, of course not. You're crazy. In 3 months, I will have exactly what I have right now? No.
I see.
So it needs to be part of the development process.
Okay.
Little by little.
Yeah.
It'll be better every day. 1% better every day towards the goal. And everyone that joins the team will join this mission of making a little bit better. Will be part of the process. Everyone working together, and then, boom. In no time, you get there.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
And all the techniques you will need are in the course. So
Absolutely.
Go through the lectures and practice, and do the challenges on GitHub.
Okay, so let me go to the next question.
Yes, let's go.
Okay, so do you think it is okay to use the xcconfig files the manner they are being used in the project? And I think this question is just because I've never seen it before. So this is the first time I started using it, and just like to have sure it's okay if there isn't any problem with it.
So how are we using it?
So we have a base, xcconfig files with configurations that are common to all the clients. Here in the case, I have a list of the asset catalogs that needs to be excluded from the compile moment. And in the specific xcconfig files, I just add the xc asset files from the specific clients. And also there is like the bundle ID, the bundle the bundle display name, and the URL of each client. And when I want to run different clients, I just point to this config files.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Unless you're having a problem with it. Are you having any problems with it?
No.
Because you said you did this to fix a problem you had, right? If before you had different targets per client.
Yes, and it just started like exploding project with complexities in the configuration files.
So you would have a different application target per client here.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And now you have one application target, but you configure it at compile time with the xcconfig.
Yes.
Specific for each client. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Again, as long as everything that we inject here that is environment specific is dealt with in the composition route. But if you have every module accessing those things that you inject and making decisions based on configuration files, then I think you're going to have issues in the future with coupling other modules with specific environmental details. As long as you deal with all of this in the composition root and you inject, the bundles, you inject these things into the other modules, no problem.
Okay. One of the things I am using from the config files, for example, is the API URL, like the one that was being get in the info file that we already saw. So, okay. It's good to know. It's not a weird thing.
No. Xconfig is very handy for this kind of scenarios. Awesome. Anything else? You mentioned analytics. Look, we have a session we released yesterday.
Yes,
is it bad if all layers depend on analytics? Have a look.
This is the case for my project too. Basically, everything depends on analytics to send the events.
So it doesn't have to. If you want to decouple it, you can. Right? It depends on the structure of the project, because if you suddenly decide to decouple everything into feature projects and you have different modules for everything, almost every module will depend on analytics, because analytics is one of those cross-cutting concerns that are spread everywhere in the code base. And the problem is, if feature A needs a new analytics functionality or something, you need to add it here. And then you affect all other modules. You may break other modules. You may have to recompile, redeploy other modules. So if that's the case and you want to decouple your components from analytics, you can. Right now it's what? A shared instance. Yeah. Access globally. Instead, you can use decorators, for example. As we show in that session, we also show in the program how to things like authentication, logging, analytics. There are some cross-cutting concerns that can be dealt with decorators. And then in the composition root, you just wrap your types into those decorators. And the modules don't need to know about them. Can use event sourcing. It really depends what you're trying to achieve, but if you start seeing problems with this global analytics, there are solutions. Check out this session. Also, the Clean iOS Architecture series on YouTube. iOS Architecture series. We also show how to create those menu wrappers to decouple analytics from everywhere in the code base. Everything depending on analytics.
Yes, and it's a really huge class today. Like, it has dozens of functions, one function for each event, like the central one that delivers the calls for the others.
Okay, so you have different. So every kind of event has a method on this global. So every time there's a new string, you need to add more methods to this.
Yes.
Type. Yeah. Looks like a good case for wrappers here. I think it's going to help you.
I think another question I have about implementing unit tests, as you said, I can do it little by little, but I have a least impression that I would need to have like a minimum quality of code to implement unit tests, because I think that maybe I will start implementing it and I will see that the code itself needs to change to be more testable. So I still have the impression that I would need to have a specific time to plan and to implement unit tests, like to improve to the basic level of the code itself to start building the tests.
Not really. There are techniques you can use to enable testability. And sometimes those techniques will make the code look worse. But it's a step, Because when you're improving code, sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. You know?
Okay.
So let's see an example here. Let's say you want to test, what was the example I gave before? It was the cell. Where is the cell? Here. Here. So let's say you want to test this cell here because you need to add a new feature here. And you want to write a unit test. But to test it, you need to actually make a request to the search API. And there's no way to replace it during tests here, right? Because this cell is creating its own dependency. Cannot inject it. Like, you can read the book working effectively with legacy code, and you will learn techniques to start testing the code. And those are not the perfect techniques, but we will enable you to start adding tests to places that are hard to test. For example, here it creates its own dependency. It's like, oh my God, how can I pass this dependency now? I'll have to pass the dependency to the view controller, and then, but to create a view controller, I need to pass the dependency somewhere and somewhere and somewhere. There are techniques. For example, you can have now mutate this to say shared. We have a search API shared instance. No, but now you can create a public var. It's not a singleton. It's mutable. It's a shared instance. So I opened the wrong one. Search API.
Yeah.
Public var shared equals search API. And if you want to say, no, I'm not going to make this public because I don't want other modules accessing it, maybe you do it like this, internal, and you use add testable in the test side. What can you do now with this shared? Since you're accessing now this shared instance directly here, when you're testing, you can replace the shared instance. Let's say you have a test. Before you run the test, you say shared equals, and you create a search API stub. Right?
Okay.
Then you instantiate your view controller, your cell. You stub here and say, oh, I want product A and product B. Product B. You're controlling the result of the request in the unit test. Right? So if you know those strategies, and you say, no, Kai, but now you have a mutable shared, yes. Because the code is so coupled and it's so deep in the dependencies that I have to do this right now. But as I start cleaning up, little by little, at some point I will eliminate this global. Right? They are steps, they are techniques to get you to a place where you're confident to make the changes.
Okay, I see.
But it can be done, right? It can be done. Maybe you're not going to like the result right now, but you know that in the long term, it's going to yield better results.
Yes. Of course, it can take some time. It's like these are hard things to do. So, like you need to be aware of these strategies, right? And then practice. So, you understand how you can use them, and then apply them at work. So, I understand what you're saying.
And with care, not to break existing functionality, right? So you do like step by step. You follow the recipe. If you get books like Refactoring book, you get the working effectively with legacy code book. They have recipes on how to deal with precise problems like this. How to test code that is using a concrete class very deep down in the object graph hierarchy.
Okay.
Right. Boom. Introduce a global mutable instance until you can actually eliminate the dependency. Important is the until. Don't stop there and think, well, it's testable now. Let's move on.
Okay.
Right? One step at a time. And this way you don't need to stop development for 6 months until the code base is testable, right? You use these these stepping stones, right? Milestones.
Yes. It's a really good mindset to know, because I was really like with the other thought on mind, like that I really would have to stop for a while to improve the code and to test it to a certain level.
About the book suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
There's one there, working effectively with legacy code. It's in C.
Mm-hmm.
C, C++. But the ideas are, close enough, you can translate it. And also in the program, we show all of that. And if you come back here another day with another project and you have a specific problem with testability, I cannot test this, Kyle. We can go over it as well.
Okay, thank you very much for it.
All right. Did we answer all your questions?
Yes, totally. And thank you very much again for it. Really clarify lots of things for me. And it's going to help me, of course.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us and for sharing. It's going to help a lot of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hanan. Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.